Hello and welcome to the Wealth Wednesday show. It's indeed a beautiful day where we get to have another chance to have an amazing guest in the house. His name is Mr. Simba Makahamadze. I hope I've spelled it correctly. And he's
That's
going to
correct.
take us through intellectual property. We can all agree that in this season, we've seen a lot of inventions and innovations, people coming up with noble ideas to solve problems that are currently affecting us in our society, especially the business world. While it is a good thing to see people doing, it's also important to learn about intellectual property and how you can protect your idea, as well as what could happen in case you violate intellectual property rights. Now, without taking much of your time, I would encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking or pressing the button below, as well as share this link with your friends and let us know in the chat box where you're watching us from. Remember to drop your questions or any comment you might be having, and we'll get time to address any issue that will be raised in the comment section. Now, back to you, Mr. Simba. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your presence with us here. Would you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be talking to you and, of course, the audience, discussing issues around intellectual property. My name we have already mentioned. I've been in the intellectual property space for the past 12 years, both covering Africa and the Middle East. So technically, I've been helping organizations and individuals alike to, create, build, and of course, manage their intellectual property. So that's what I've been doing.
Absolutely. And I can say, reading from your biography, you really have done quite an amazing work globally. And the clientele that you've served, it's something that really intrigued me. And I can just say, keep up the amazing work. And I believe we are going to have a very insightful conversation. Now, as the topic of today is intellectual property rights, Mr. Simba, what is intellectual property? And do we have types of the same?
So, simply put, or put in layman's language, intellectual property refers to the creations of the mind or the creations of the intellect, where the name intellectual property actually comes from. And when we talk about intellectual property as a concept, we do have branches, if I may put it that way, under intellectual property. So we do have intellectual property as the overall name, but under intellectual property, we do have what is referred to as industrial property and copyright and related rights. And in some jurisdictions, they say copyright and neighboring rights. Now, in terms of industrial property, we do have things like trademarks for brand names. We've got patents for inventions. We've got industrial designs for designs of objects, designs of gadgets. Talk of our mobile phones that we use, laptops, the vehicles that we drive, and other different gadgets that we use in our day-to-day life. So that's industrial designs. Then we do have trade secrets. Trade secrets, confidential information. We've got integrated circuits. We've got layouts and designs. I've mentioned geographical indications, which is something that is really important for not just this region, but of course the African continent as well. Geographical indications, they speak to the origin of a product, where certain aspects or the qualities of that product are specifically related to that region. Examples would include for UAE, we can talk of Alain water, which comes from the Alain region. From an African point of view, we've got cassava from Cameroon. We've got coffee from Burundi. We've got Ethiopian coffee. So this speaks to the origin of a product. Then, in terms of copyright, it protects things like literary and artistic works, books, music. We've got softwares that is protected under copyright. So basically, this speaks to the types and examples of intellectual property.
Amazing. And a lot of people just think intellectual property is just for music. If someone is having music, they need to protect it, but they don't think about it in the side of the other categories, like we just mentioned, like coffee, Ethiopian coffee. It falls under the geographical intellectual property, the same way you've just mentioned about Alane water. It's because it's coming from a certain geographical area. Now, we will go right into the next thing that I'm just thinking. What you've just profoundly explained what intellectual property is. Now, we have intellectual property rights. What does that mean? And is there a difference? And if there is.
Interesting question. Intellectual property as a concept, I explained it as the general creations of the mind. Now, if we look at intellectual property rights, we are looking at the legal concept of protection of intellectual property. Now, when you protect your intellectual property, you have the intellectual property rights, which are private rights around the protection of intellectual property. So those rights are a legal concept that gives you exclusivity in terms of use or commercialization of your intellectual property. To take it closer to home, I'll give you an example. If you have a trademark or a logo that you have registered as a trademark, it's protected for a period of 10 years, right? And within that period, what it means when you do have intellectual property rights over that logo or over that trademark, it means no one can use that logo, or no one can use a logo or that is similar, or in some cases confusingly similar to your trademark. Because the idea of intellectual property is to give exclusivity, and at the same time, from a trademark point of view, is to allow the audience or the customer to be able to distinguish between your products and services and my products and services. So in terms of trademark protection, you find that the distinctiveness part is very important.
Oh, nice. And as you're just speaking especially about the trademark, and sometimes like a logo, you've seen a company has this specific logo, and then a competitor brings the same services but slightly tilts that logo to confuse the consumer. Now, where does that fall? What category can we say that this person has violated intellectual property rights of company A?
Definitely. You see, the idea of intellectual property protection, basically, you are putting a fence around your ideas, right? And when someone does what you've just said, they are technically encroaching into some other person or some other entity's space. So what that means is what we then call trademark infringement in the name of a trademark, in the form of a trademark, like you've said. Someone brings something that is confusingly similar, right? Now, what that means is the client or the customer is going to be confused, which defeats the purpose of a trademark, which is supposed to be assisting the clients to distinguish service providers or those providers of specific products.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great thing that you've explained to us what property rights is. And I would love to know, maybe someone who is watching us out there is like, okay, must I have these intellectual property rights? What is the importance of it aside from protection? What are the other benefits of this?
Interesting. So, protection, like I've said, it gives the owner of intellectual property specific rights that are jurisdiction specific or that are territorial, which means those rights within certain territories. When you do protect, that protection gives you exclusivity. What it means is that third parties cannot produce, sell or market, import or offer services under a trademark that is similar or confusingly similar to yours. What you are technically doing with intellectual property protection is marking your territory. I'll give you an example. So if you are offering a product under a specific trademark, right? You, as the owner of the intellectual property rights, you've got a right to stop third parties from offering products carrying a similar or a confusingly similar trademark. This can be done within that market. And of course, from a broader enforcement point of view, where you can also be able to stop the importation of goods that are carrying a trademark that is similar or confusingly similar to yours. That's one of the most important advantages, where as an owner of intellectual property or as a corporate, you've got a competitive advantage based on the protection of your intellectual property. And then in terms of advantage, like you've asked, intellectual property, with those rights, you can either commercialize or exploit, that is technically using your own intellectual property, right? In the process of trade or commerce. But at the same time, you can also make money out of licensing of intellectual property, where someone can use your intellectual property, someone can use your brand, someone can use your technology and make money on your behalf. Besides that, you can also do what is called an outright sale, where you can actually sell your intellectual property rights for the use of by another entity or by another individual. So that protection helps you to do that, because without protection, you cannot then do that, because whatever you have, be it a technology or a logo or sometimes a brand name, like it has been interchangeably used, it's available to the public. So there is no benefit anyway. So protection offers someone that benefit and, of course, advantages from a commercial point of view.
Oh, absolutely amazing. And just as you said, I have seen quite a number of innovators whose idea was executed by someone else, and that person even ran ahead of them and copyrighted it. And then now the original inventor or innovator does not get to benefit from it at all. So I think it's very important we get to learn about intellectual property rights and protection, because we have a lot of people who bring forth noble ideas, but they do not know how to protect it and actually benefit from it. And now, Mr. Simba, you've just mentioned quite a number of things about intellectual property rights and the protection side of it. Now, how about intellectual property infringement? What is it and how does it happen? Because we are in a world of copy paste a lot. You, you see, for example, you go to this country, you see they're doing something and you're like, oh, I can do this where I am. So you go and duplicate the same thing. So can you just shed more light about that?
Okay, so what I would do, first of all, is to go back to the point that I mentioned earlier, that intellectual property protection is territorial. That you are protected in UAE, for example, doesn't mean you're protected in Saudi Arabia, doesn't mean that you're protected in Kenya, right? So if you have protection in a specific country or in a specific region, it doesn't mean you are protected in the next. So in this case, if you have, we have seen ideas, we've seen concepts being copied from one jurisdiction to another, or from one territory to another. As long as they exist no protection in that jurisdiction, it's not infringement. Now, when someone has got protection in a specific territory, and then someone copies within a specific territories, possibly from a trademark point of view, I think I'll be more inclined to the trademark side of things, because that's the one that is closer to home, that is easier. But of course, we can also talk of infringement from a patent point of view, or from a technology point of view, as well as from a copyright point of view. So infringement happens when there is protection that exists. So what is important for the audience to understand is that before we talk about your intellectual property being infringed upon, we need to talk about protection. Where have you protected? So infringement happens where there is protection. If there is no protection, then it's public knowledge. Whatever is there is in the public domain. It can be copied.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't know actually this intellectual property infringement varies from country to country. So where you are protected is what will matter for you to say that my intellectual property has been infringed or violated. And again, I think that's tells us why, sometimes you check on Google and, people download information and use it. And you wonder, why is it that, there is no intellectual property infringement in such scenarios? Thank you very much.
So that part, Sheila, is very important. I've had discussions around that, where we talk about, number one, having said that intellectual property protection is territorial. So infringement is viewed within the context of the laws of that specific country. And from a regional point of view, it's also viewed within the laws of that particular region. When it comes to the issue around, accessing information on Google and using it, that centers around copyright infringement. And I was laughing with a colleague when they just saw information that was important to them, and they tried to copy. They couldn't copy. They were wondering why they couldn't copy and then use that information. And I explained to them issues around technological protection mechanisms in copyright, where some creators are using various technologies to protect their content and to track their content. We have had instances where clients were sued over content that they took from the internet. All that content that you see from the internet is not absolutely free, and one has to be very careful in terms of the content that they use. We've got branding companies, creative companies. Sometimes they get content from the internet, then they use it at a commercial level, where specific licenses around that information do not allow commercial use. So this whole tendency of just downloading and using stuff, it's very dangerous, especially from a commercial point of view.
Correct. Especially, in a world where, you just download, just Google and download and use it. It's important for us to check if the whatever you are downloading has a patent or copyright, or it's intellectually protected, so that you don't end up in more trouble than you could even think of. And you've spoken a lot about intellectual property rights and the infringement, and as we always say, everything has its own pros and cons. Now, what are the pros or the advantages of intellectual property generally, especially to an individual who is just coming across this idea?
So, like you've rightfully said, there are always pros and cons in every concept. my opinion as someone who is pro IP is that the key idea is to foster innovation or to encourage innovation, because there are advantages that are associated with innovation and intellectual property protection, which then helps the next person to even think better, to also get the benefits that are associated with intellectual property. But of course, there is always need to then strike a balance between the monopolistic aspect of intellectual property protection and, of course, the public side of it, or the public policy side of it. And it's something that countries are always looking at in terms of their laws, where there is a balance, there is an incentive to create something new, but at the same time making sure that that which is new is accessible to the public. That's why you see, in terms of patents for inventions, patents are protected for a period of 20 years, after which they then go into the public domain. So whichever technology or whichever aspect you've invented, it can be protected under the patent regime. But after that specific period, it goes into the public domain. What it does is creating a knowledge foundation where other people in other research can take from. So you create knowledge, you get incentivized for that knowledge, but at a certain time, that knowledge goes into the public domain and anyone can use it, which is different from the trademark protection, which is in most jurisdictions is valid for 10 years, and you can renew indefinitely for similar periods of 10 years each. But for a patent, after 20 years, it goes into the public domain. Whoever then invents or creates knowledge, they do have a foundation to start from, which is what is normally referred to in the patenting space as prior art.
Now, that means if you're going to patent anything, can you renew it after 20 years?
Well, there are a few jurisdictions that have an option to sort of extend patent protection, but normally after the 20-year period, it goes into the public domain. Of course, in between, you'll be paying annual fees to make sure that the patent is alive and the protection is valid. But after that period, it goes into the public domain. People have got a knowledge foundation that they can use to further research and improve the lives of the people.
So you've really dropped some gems in the house, and I believe our audience is really learning a lot, as I am as well. To everyone that is watching us, thank you so much for being here with us. We encourage you to share your comment or question in the chat box, as our guest speaker, Mr. Simba, will be addressing them as we move forward. Remember, he is an intellectual property consultant, and he has 12 years of experience in this field. And as you have just had the conversation, he has given us a wide spectrum on what intellectual property is and what are the rights that you have, and how what can happen in case you violate them. Now, Mr. Simba, we've learned a lot. If I want to now get, let's say, like a trademark, or get that intellectual property protection, how can one go about? And what's the process? Are there organizations that do that specifically, or how does one get to get this service?
So they are organizations that handle those issues. So I'll try to answer your question from a national point of view, a regional point of view, and of course an international point of view. Like you've asked in terms of trademarks, like I've said before, these rights are private rights that are granted by governments.
Yeah.
So what that means is that there are intellectual property offices within countries, mostly they're government institutions. And they are responsible for the administrative side of intellectual property. So in every country, you have a specific intellectual property office that one can then be able to file and protect their trademark. Of course, they will need the assistance of a trademark attorney or a trademark agent. That's from a national point of view, where you can protect your trademark within the country. Then if we are talking about this region, the Middle East, you have to be filing your trademarks at specific IP offices within each and every country. Then if we go to Africa, we've got 2 regional bodies where one can file their trademark that can cover a whole bunch of countries. We've got the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO. It's got a membership of 20 African countries. However, in terms of trademark protection, they currently have 12 that one can actually designate under the organization's Banjul protocol. So what that means is if one wants to protect their trademark from a regional point of view, they can file their application through ARIPO and be able to cover 12 countries, or they can do that through the OWAPI office. OWAPI office is has got 17 African countries, which is mostly the French-speaking countries, and they use a system that is called a unitary system, where you file one application of your trademark and it covers all the 17 countries, right? And then from a European point of view, we've got the European Union IP office. One can also apply for their trademark in that region, which currently covers 27 countries. So one application covers 27 countries. Of course, now 27 because of the exit of the United Kingdom from that regional body. So if one wants to protect in the UK, they have to file directly into the UK. Then from an international point of view, there's also a route where one, depending on their market strategy, can then be able to make a single application at world intellectual property level under what is called the Madrid system. That currently covers up to, I think, about 124 countries. So what one can do is just to designate. It's like simply ticking boxes of the countries that you need protection. So those are the routes that one can use. But I always recommend that when someone is doing their trademark protection, it has to be guided and driven by their market strategy, and make sure that protection happens before one ventures into a specific market.
Oh, okay. That's quite insightful, because a lot of people just think about the marketing strategy, but they don't think about intellectual property protection, which is something you've really explained how we can go about it from a national, international, as well as territorial, regional perspective. Now, we are in a digitized era. We have social media, we have everyone is doing something either on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Now, how does social media affect intellectual property? And sometimes I don't know, but can someone look at another person's video on social media and they can say, like, this is something it is mine and this person has copied from me? Can that happen anyway?
Yeah, I mean, that can happen. A lot of intellectual property infringement has been happening on the digital space, especially from a copyright point of view. Number one, we've got, people sharing content, people sharing videos, people sharing photos and stuff like that. Now, there's also issues of trademark infringement on the digital space as well, where people can use other people's logos and stuff like that. So as an owner of intellectual property rights, or as a holder of intellectual property rights, one has to consent or to agree to the use of their brand or the use of their trademark, for example, on collateral material, especially for, partnerships, collaboration, and stuff like that. One has to consent, and infringement can happen when people use logos that do not belong to them without the consent of the owners. Then again, in terms of copyright, we have seen, I mentioned issues of photos and videos, right? People create videos, people create content and post on social media. And people have developed a tendency of just plucking out content and reusing it, which again speaks to intellectual property infringement. And some of the content, that is, if you go there, databases of free images, there are databases of free video content, but there's always that fine print that one has to read and understand. Some of that information is said to be free, and that free is subjective. Some of the content is free for personal use, but the moment you venture into the commercial space, you are already infringing because that content is not meant for the commercial space. But of course, there are also people who are then against the monopolistic aspect of intellectual property, who are creating content for free. I mean, they have been for quite some time now the copyleft movement, where content has been created for free, music has been created for free for people to use, because there are people who believe that knowledge and content is for public consumption and it should not be monopolized. But again, if we look at the point that I've raised earlier before, content or innovation doesn't just emerge, it's created. And that creation comes with an investment, be it of time, be it of money, and all that. And that investment has to be recouped in one way or the other. So I'm not someone who is for the free approach to innovation, or the free approach to content and intellectual property. But again, if you can fund it and provide it for free, then that's good.
Absolutely. And as I just sharing this insight, I started thinking, do you think this due to lack of knowledge about intellectual property, it has discouraged people from being creative, because they feel like, even if I bring a new idea, someone will steal it, so there's no need. And due to people having that access to easily copy paste and plug things and make them theirs, do you think it has killed innovation, especially in the youth?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point, because look, this has been the situation. If I'm to speak from an African point of view, the incentives around innovation and creation of intellectual property have really been low, because there is also costs that are associated with protecting intellectual property, to the extent that when those youths you are talking about, or those young innovators, come up with the ideas, their first thought is to find someone who can fund that, or someone who can help them to commercialize that. But unfortunately, some individuals and corporates have also taken advantage of that, because they have the financial muscle to fund an idea, get the IP protected, and get whatever product or service to the market. And we have had those situations where people run with their ideas for seeking assistance, but at the same time they'll end up losing them. And as experts in that space, we always recommend the use of non-disclosure agreements, where before you go to a potential investor with your idea, have a non-disclosure agreement where you try as much as possible to secure your idea before it goes away, because it can actually go away. It can be taken.
Actually, I've seen it, especially in the music industry. You find an artist saying they've lost their music because they entered into a contract with a certain organization, and during that tenure, they created a music or a song, and now it has gone together with all the benefits that
The
could have come
rights,
with
yeah.
it. Yeah, they're right. So I'm just wondering, how can a person in such a situation address it? Is there a legal way to get your intellectual property back, or since there's already a contract you signed, that's it? Because that's one thing that has led to many musicians being poor after a long period of
That's
time
very true.
in the industry. Or most innovators, you meet them and they're like, you invented this, why are you like this right now? So how can one go about such in case they find themselves in such a situation?
What I would say in those cases is, I mean, when you're building something, what is critical is the foundation. When the foundation is not solid, when the foundation is not strong, then the whole structure will definitely collapse. So for artists, mostly it starts from the contract with the record label or with the producers, and that's where the issue of rights is addressed. And most artists then become victims of some what I would call predatory organizations that would then like take their rights in exchange of a very small amount of money. But here we do have an artist who doesn't have the financial muscle to like fund their album, and they want someone to help, but in the process they lose their rights. So all things being equal, one should be able to negotiate a favorable contract for themselves, and of course be assisted by an attorney to be doing that. But sometimes they are not in a good negotiating position because they don't have the money. So there are two things: either their music doesn't go out there, or it has to go out there while at the same time they are completely losing their rights. So
Yeah.
those are the issues that need to be addressed. But I do believe that it has to be addressed from the initial contract where you then decide on the rights, because most of these artists, they end up signing off their rights to a record label. And
Yeah.
how the music is going to be used, how much money is going to be made, they end up losing more. So I do
Yes.
believe it has to be addressed from the foundation. That is the initial contract.
Absolutely, Mr. Simba. And I think it's time people start seeking education around intellectual property, so that before you can sign any contract for your creativity, you have to understand what you're doing. Because in this intellectual property thing, people think it's only for big organizations and all that, but you forget you can't get yourself in such a situation, especially when it comes to creativity and innovating anything. Now, I would love us to continue with this conversation, and I know you are dropping gems in the room. But maybe we can get to do another session. I think we need to start even a global awareness for people to learn about intellectual property, because the stories out here, they are so touching when you see someone who is really talented, but their talent is being misused by another person just because they did not understand, especially the aspects of intellectual property. Now we come to something else that I've been thinking, because at the start you said people get to make money out of intellectual property. You can license it out and all that. Now I want you to explain to us from an investor perspective. If I want to invest in intellectual property of an industry of my choice, how do I go about it? And then on the other side, as someone who is the creative person, how can I get an investor to, give me money because of my my innovation or creativity?
Interesting question. I will try to answer it as much as I can. Number one, like the term rightfully say, intellectual property. You see, the word property is very important, but the difference is that this kind of property is intangible, right? And for someone to then consider investing into that, the first thing is protection, where we then talk about intellectual property rights. Okay, that's number one. And just to aid to answer that question, if you look at the biggest players in the world right now, or the biggest corporates, they don't own land, they don't own buildings,
Yes.
they own intellectual property. So I always like to use a quotation from Mark Getty of Getty Images. I mean, I think
Yeah.
people have been downloading images and getting images, right? He says the
I've
intellectual
actually been
property is
reading
the
about him.
oil of the 21st century. The bigger players across the world, they've got patents, they've got technologies. Now, it's property. So one can actually invest in that property. And in this world where we are in, intellectual property is actually being used as collateral for borrowing money, something which I would then want to see also happening in Africa, financial institutions understanding the value of IP, and of course allowing people to use that intellectual property as collateral. So one can actually invest through. I talked about licensing. One can actually buy intellectual property rights. One can actually invest in intellectual property rights through licensing, where one can get to use intellectual property under license, and of course run a business under that. From a creative industry point of view, I remember my experience with one artist. They were trying, I mean, very popular artists, they were trying to get money to fund their album, but banks couldn't understand. I took it upon myself to sit down with one bank and said, look, this guy is popular. He's got intellectual property. Give him the money and then structure some form of a deal where you can get your money back. But they couldn't take it. But that very same artist managed, when they did their album, they launched their album. The next day, they sold more than 100,000 copies, right? Now, look,
Wow.
let's assume that the 100,000 copies were just being sold for $1, right? That's $100,000. So if someone had helped them to invest the 8,000 US dollars that they wanted to get their album done and launched, they could have structured a very good deal. But that was just to show the value of intellectual property. So indeed, one can invest in intellectual property, and protecting intellectual property is also a form of investment in itself.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, because look, when you don't protect your intellectual property, it's in the public, right? There's no protection. But when you protect, you are actually investing in your intellectual property. So those rights will then help. Or if you are going to go out there to look for investment, or to look for someone to invest, be it in your startup or in whatever business you are doing, one question that you are going to be asked there is intellectual property ownership and protection. Do you have intellectual property? Is it protected? Because honestly, if you are going to invest in a business that does not have intellectual property protected, then that man can literally go down the drain.
Yeah.
Because anyone can copy whatever you are doing and run with it. So protection and paying for it is investment on its own.
Absolutely. Mr. Simba, just a last one that just came to me, a last question is, you said sometimes in other countries, people are using intellectual property as collateral to obtain financing from financial institutions. How does that happen? Like you present to them the intellectual property you own, and then they evaluate it, or how does it happen?
So intellectual property valuation is a different ballgame altogether, and the experience has been that some institutions, they're actually not able to do that, to then look at what we call an intellectual property portfolio, how many trademarks someone has, or a corporate, how many trademarks do they have, how many patents do they have, in terms of copyright, what do they have, and then bringing all that together, that portfolio, and giving it a value is one challenge that financial institutions have been facing. And we do have experts that are actually, that specifically focus on the valuation of intellectual property. I think you've heard of brand values before.
Yeah.
Google is valued at so much, Coca-Cola is valued at so much, those big players. And most of that value lies in their intellectual property portfolios. It lies in their patents. It lies in their technologies, right? And
Yeah.
if you look at transactions, I think here a very good example will be the acquisition of Souk by Amazon. Big figures were involved, but the
Yeah.
bigger chunk of that, we are talking about more than $500 million, and the bigger chunk of that is intellectual property that was
Oh, okay.
paid for. So it's not land, it's not building, it's not oil that they were paying for. The bigger chunk was intellectual property.
Wow, this is so amazing. I think it's time we become super creative and ensure we get the intellectual property protection, because that's a worthy investment to consider, especially in the times that we are in. Now, this brings us to the end of today's show. We are super grateful for having you in the show and allowing us to learn a lot from you, especially about intellectual property. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your presence, and we believe that as you watch this video, even later on, you'll be able to get some nuggets that you can apply either in your business or as a person in matters that concern innovation and creativity. Now, Mr. Simba, if someone would want to reach out to you, maybe they have a question, they need some clarification, how can they get to you, your website or something they can use to reach out to you?
So for getting in touch with me, for PalladiumIP Consultants here in UAE and in Africa as well, people can use Simba at palladium-ip.com. Simba at palladium-ip.com. That's the email that you can get me on. And of course, I also have Simba at AllThingsIP4Africa.com. Again, this is a very important platform that is driving IP protection in Africa, especially for the global market. We've established a marketplace of IP practitioners across the continent, where we are opening up the continent to the global market to make sure that they have enough access to resident service providers in each and every African country for the protection and management of their intellectual property in Africa.
Thank you so much. I think you will send me the link so that I can attach to the live video. So anyone who wants to just get to you, they can just click on the link and get to your website. Once again, thank you so much to our audience. It's been an amazing Wealth Wednesday episode. Ensure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, share this link as much as possible, and most importantly, watch and put into action what you learn, because that is why we do what we do. Until then, we hope to see you next time. Keep safe and stay financially healthy.
Thank you so much.